Hello and welcome back. So I'm going to do a video today about how to round numbers. Most children at this time of year, at the very beginning of the year, they will be learning all about the basics of numbers, and rounding is one of them. Now whenever I teach this, I start by giving the children a reason to do it. I get a child up about in the room and I give them a shopping list and I put price tags on random things around the room, like their rulers and their lunch boxes and stuff, and I make them go and try and buy them and keep a tally in their head of how much they're spending, and I make the prices quite complicated so they definitely can't do it. And as they go round, the children find it funnier and funnier that the shopper just can't do it because it's too difficult to keep track of lots of numbers in your head like that. That's why we use rounding. We use it to help us to estimate. We use it to help us to get rough answers. Once the children have seen that in action, rounding makes so much more sense. No one has got time to sit there rounding for no reason. But if children can see that it links directly to estimating, they understand it and they understand why we do it. So they're a little bit more motivated. So that's how I get children into the idea of rounding. And I'm going to show you how children would be taught to do rounding at school these days, because it's something that probably is quite intuitive to most adults now, but actually to try to learn it and to try to learn how to round to different numbers and things like that, there's quite a lot to it. So let's have a little look. Okay, so let's look at the analogy of a barbecue. This is just a helpful thing to get children to think about it logically. If you lived at house number 18 and you were invited to a barbecue by the people at house number 10 or by the people at house number 20, you're probably going to go for the closest. To walk all the way down to house number 10, that's 8 houses away. It would take much longer than just going the 2 houses up to house number 20. It makes much more sense. We're being logical here. The difficulty comes though if you were to live at house number 15, because it would be exactly 5 houses away to go to house 10 and exactly 5 houses away to go to 20. That's why the high five rule exists. Children at school might learn a rhyme to help them remember it. There's all sorts of things that help them remember, but I use high five with my class because they remember that quite easily. So if the digit that you're looking at, which we'll come to in a minute, if that is a 5, then it's always going to round up. So the number 15, despite the fact that it's directly between 10 and 20, it rounds up to 20. It can work with other numbers as well. It doesn't have to be tens, so we can sort of use a looser number line where we don't necessarily have all the different numbers on, and we can have, say, rounding to the nearest 100. So we might have something like this. You might live at number 325, and you would go to the barbecue at number 300, and things like that. For some children, this number line business works really, really well. And actually, there's lots of different ways that you can use a number line. Here's another one. If you've seen my place value video, I use place value counters. Children at school use them all the time now. They're really fantastic. And actually, scientific research has showed that if you are doing things with your hands and practically doing things as you learn, the connections in your brain just get made so much stronger, and so the learning will be much more effective. So something like this is really helpful. You could lay out counters. I've gone for hundreds here. But I'm going to round to the nearest 1,000. So I've got my thousands there, and I can place my number whereabouts it would go. So I've got sort of 2,000, so this would be 2,100, 2,200, 2,300, etc. And I can see that if I'm rounding 2,247 to the nearest 1,000, I can see that it's closer to 2,000. That will work for some children. Others might prefer not to use it. Just experiment with what your child finds best. If your child is a really practical child, like many are, you could actually set up this really basic number line with some masking tape on the floor of your house. It might seem arduous, but actually it's really not. You just set up a blank line. This one here has got markings on, but a blank one works even better because then you can have any numbers. So put a line on the floor, you decide what numbers go at each end, or the child does, and they can actually physically practice seeing where would be closer. For some children, actually acting maths out like that is a really, really invaluable tool. So let's look at the actual steps a child would take at school to try to round numbers. So first of all, we'd say count in what you're rounding to. So this is just a good warm-up exercise to make sure that the children are really aware of what they're trying to get to. So for example, if I was trying to round to the nearest 10, I would count up in multiples of 10. So 10, 20, 30, 40, etc. 140, 150, 160, things like that, just so the children are familiar with what we mean when we say to a nearest 10, because that can be a bit confusing. For example, if I'm rounding to the nearest thousands, again, count up in thousands, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, or even higher, 21,000, 22,000, 23,000. It just gives them a really clear idea of what sort of number they're aiming for, i.e., a thousands number. It really just puts that picture in their mind. Otherwise, it's a really abstract concept, whereas counting is something they're very used to. So once they've got sort of that to warm up and to get it set in their mind, this is the important bit. 2 stages all at once here. So first of all, you look to the right of what you're rounding to. So if I was asking a child to round 436 to the nearest 10, they would be looking at the tens column to see whether it would become 440 or stay at 430. And that decision all rests on what's happening to the right of the column that I'm using, so the ones column. So when I'm rounding to the nearest 10, the ones column is what matters. This has got a 6. That's where that high 5 rule comes in that we mentioned at the beginning. Because it's more than 5, it's going to round up to 440. Of course, if that was different, and let's say it was 434, that's now below 5, and so that one would round down to 430. So those are those 2 steps together. Look to the right of what you're rounding to, and then use the high 5 rule. And that works with whatever you're rounding to. So if I was trying to round to the nearest 100, I'd be thinking, right, well, there's my 893. So is that going to be 800 or round up to 900? So I look to the right of that. I see that to the right of the column I'm using, I see a 9. So using my high 5 rule, I know that I need to round up to 900. And again, if I look to the right and see that I've got a lower number below 5, I would round down. Finally then, it's really important to check the answer. So this is where it comes back to the counting business. We need to check that we've got the right sort of number. So if I'm trying to round 18 to the nearest 10 and I get 20, that's great. I've got a tens number. If I'm trying to round 352 to the nearest 100 and I get 400, brilliant. Another 100 number, 400. Same again. 8,271 to the nearest 1,000. If I've got 8,000, that's great. I'm clearly on the right track. So checking the answer is really important. It becomes slightly more complicated though, and there's the possibility for a misconception or a misunderstanding with something like this. If I'm trying to round to the nearest 100, but the number itself is a thousands number, it just becomes a little bit more confusing, and children might be inclined to do something like this, to say 7,283 to the nearest 100 is 7,000, because they're focusing on the 7. Of course, what they should be doing is focusing on the hundreds digit, which is that 2. So they should, for this one, have looked at the 2 and thought, right, is that going to be 7,200 or 7,300? It would go up because of the 8, so their answer should be 7,300. Now, of course, that way, if you're saying it like that, 7,300, you've actually got your 100 in the answer. So checking that answer to make sure you've got the right type of answer is invaluable. It really helps them to spot some really simple and easy errors that lots of people would make. So a couple of other common misconceptions. Lots of children will always look at the ones column regardless of what they're trying to round to by mistake. So for example, they might have been asked to round 729 to the nearest 100. So what they should be doing is wondering whether that 7 is going to, become 700 or 800. But they look straight to the 9 rather than the 2. They say, oh, I see that it's a 9, so it must be rounding to the nearest, rounding up to 800 because there's a 9. But as we mentioned earlier, we look directly to the right of what we're rounding to. So if I'm rounding to the nearest 100, I'm looking only at the 2. The 9 is totally irrelevant. It does not matter what that is at all. What matters is this digit here, the one to the right of whatever I'm rounding to. So for this one, I should get 700. One more common misconception then. Sometimes children round too far down, and it sort of makes sense. It's logical when you see it. So, for example, if they were asked that same question, rounding 729 to the nearest 100, they might think of a number line like this. They might have 729 on there, and they might think, well, 100 lower would be 600, 100 higher would be 800. Of course, what they should be doing is not getting that answer 600, but they should be understanding that actually that's a 700 here. So they're trying to decide not between 600 and 800, but between 700 and 800. So look out for that one if you're helping your children with this sort of thing at home. So then, just to recap, we need to count up to start with in what we're rounding to make sure we're using the right type of numbers, tens, hundreds, thousands, etc. We need to look to the right-hand side of whichever thing we're rounding to. So if I'm rounding a tens number, I need to look at the ones column. If I'm rounding a thousands number, I need to look at the hundreds column. The high five rule, when I look at that column, I'm seeing whether it's a number that's 5 or more, and if so, I go high five and I round up. And finally, checking those answers to make sure that they are in line with what I'm supposed to be doing. So if I've been asked to round to the nearest 1,000, have I got a 1,000 number? If I'm trying to round to the nearest 100, is my number a something 100? If not, I must have made a mistake. So there we are. I hope you found that helpful and that it was clear. As always, I'd really love to hear from you if there's anything else that would make more sense, if there's anything I can go over more clearly, if you've got any other questions. I'm happy to make videos on as much as I can, so please do get in touch if there's a specific area of maths or English or any area of school actually that you'd like me to introduce. So please do let me know. And if this has been helpful or you think it might be helpful to other people, please do subscribe so you can see all the videos coming up. There'll be lots coming up in the next few weeks and months. And of course, please like my Facebook page, my Instagram page, and share it around so that other people can get their hands on this free resource. Thank you very much. Bye.